I'm Sean.
And I'm Kenny.
And we are Lunatic Fringe with our guest,
Mike Steck from My Utah CCW. Go ahead and say hello.
Hello, everybody.
Mike is a local Second Amendment attorney and entrepreneur. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I've got a few programs that I've been running all the way through law school. I started up a concealed carry and tactical training program, and that put me through law school. I'm prior military and came home and saw a need for people to learn how to use firearms effectively. And after that, went through law school and have since taken the bar and now admitted to practice law in Utah and continuing to build the My Utah CCW plus a new program where we're selling firearms and training and target systems. So that's on joefirearms.com. That, and I'm building my law practice and Second Amendment business and basically anything else that comes through the door to take care of my family for now. But the primary focus in firearms.
Right on, and that's exactly why we have you here today. We're gonna just pick your Second Amendment lawyerly brain for about 10 minutes here and just kind of run by some scenarios and where you see where self-defense law falls short and what scenarios would yield different results and what you would recommend in those scenarios. So I think Sean actually has scenario number one that we want to talk about. So
scenario number one is a news article that happened recently. There was apparently there was a young man who was a student at in high school. He went to visit his stepfather and mother in a gated community in Florida, I believe. In any event, he was walking. He had gone to the store. He was walking back home. He had an iced tea and Skittles that he had gotten from the store, and he was spotted by Captain of the Neighborhood Watch, who saw. Let's hate to inject race into it, but it seems unavoidable in this story, and that's really what it's being portrayed as in the media. He saw a black kid in his neighborhood, a black 17-year-old, and so he was following him. I guess he followed him in his car for a little ways. He called police to say there was a suspicious person in the neighborhood, and they were called. The operator told him not to pursue him and don't confront him. I don't know what they don't confront, but they said don't follow him. Apparently he did not heed that, and in somehow a quote-unquote altercation ensued where the fellow, they don't know who talked to who conclusively because the police showed up and the young man was dead and the man had shot him and the young man was unarmed. Tell us sort of the ins and outs of and what is really outraging people right now is that the shooter was not arrested. Nothing's been filed against him and whatnot. And I know that law and order isn't real life, but what are sort of the ins and outs of how the police will approach that type of situation and how culpability will be determined?
Sure. So a couple things here. First and foremost, the thing that people need to understand is that at the end of the day, it's not up to law enforcement really to decide who gets prosecuted and who is not prosecuted. That's for the prosecutor, right? Law enforcement are generally they'll be consulted. The prosecutor will talk to them, find out what's going on and what their input is as to whether charges should be filed or not. So that's the first thing to understand. And for any self-defense shooting, for that matter, law enforcement officers have a duty to perform, which is to investigate a homicide. You pull a firearm, you shoot in self-defense or not in self-defense, law enforcement have a duty to investigate it as a homicide. So that's the first thing.
It is a homicide.
It is a homicide. You take someone else's life, it's a homicide.
Right.
The whole issue of self-defense and the issue of be it murder or manslaughter or whatever the degree that the prosecutor wants to push really depends upon the facts of the case. And so and that's the problem with these situations is that first and foremost you don't understand all the facts of what ensued and what took place. Now, some of the background, all right? And so I don't know Florida's law per se, but generally speaking, you've got three things that you have to have for any kind of self-defense situation. And first and foremost, you've got to have a reasonable belief, all right? A reasonable belief in the law is considered an objective standard. Objective standard meaning your average everyday person, what would they have felt or thought in that situation, all right? And to speak to the racism issue, it is not considered a reasonable belief to have a fear of people of a different skin color. That is not considered reasonable. It has to be the person was huge, they had a firearm, they had a gun, they had something that your average everyday person would expect to be.
Or they verbally threatened me.
Exactly. Okay,
they did something threatening.
Those types of things.
Yep. Right. Just the mere presence of an African American doesn't constitute a suspicious person in the neighborhood.
Exactly.
And neither should somebody just with a firearm. Their case law has shown that they can't be considered armed and dangerous. They can only be considered armed if they're open carrying, for example, not necessarily dangerous.
Right. Exactly. The mere presence of a firearm itself doesn't constitute.
Yep. It's action plus words, right? So it's somebody reaching for a firearm, that sort of a thing. So being an open carry person, which I'm not because for these reasons it's complicated, but just being an open carry person, getting it into an altercation does not mean that you're just going to get shot. All right, that's not reasonable. The second thing you've got to have is it's got to be, you have to feel a need to protect yourself, right? And number 3, the threat against you has to be imminent. Those are generally considered the 3 things that you have to have for using any kind of force. And in terms of deadly force, it has to be likely to cause death or serious bodily injury, all right, the actions that the person is taking against you. One of the challenges that the law is trying to address in self-defense is that we don't want to, in society, justify somebody for shooting just because you swear at somebody, you get in their face, you get up aggressive, you're talking to them in a rude fashion. That's not justified self-defense, right? But on the other hand, we don't want to make people wait until it's too late, right? If you're waiting until bad guy is actually stabbing you or has the gun in your face and is pulling the trigger, it's too late. So there's a time there, and that's where this notion of preemptive strike comes into play, and that's why these situations are so gray, is because we say reasonable belief, necessary, and imminency. However, it's that preemptive strike. So when does it become justifiable? It really becomes a question of fact, that where you don't have a lot of facts, you can see why this situation is very gray and probably has a lot of people upset or concerned about the way that these things go down.
Okay. Under what situations then would the police typically arrest somebody? What is the line that decides whether, okay, we're going to put this person under arrest, we're going to take them in, or we're going to let them go pending the prosecutor deciding whether to charge somebody or not?
Yeah, so really there's several things, and it depends upon the police agency. Several things if they feel that the person needs some time to calm down, and that's the thing that I'll teach to my concealed carry students as well, is expect to get arrested. You pull a firearm and you shoot in self-defense, you should expect to be arrested, because if you're not talking to the police, which I tell people not to talk to police, because you've been in a very serious altercation, your mind may not be completely there, you need some time to process it, don't talk to the police, get an attorney, and then you will talk to the police.
Well, I mean, in any situation, whether your mind's not right or anything, you should probably get an attorney in such a serious situation anyway, in any event.
Yeah. And I hate to say it this way, but generally speaking, police officers are not your friends.
No,
right?
and that's absolutely.
We know that.
We've discussed that on the podcast a lot, is that the executive branch, represented by the police, they exist to jam you up, basically. I mean, they exist to intervene on citizens on behalf of the state, and that's their whole purpose.
It's never a good outcome for you.
Exactly. Right. I mean, if a police officer pulls you over and they say, "Can I search your car?" the answer is always no.
Right.
Right. And if a police officer has given you back your driver license, you've got to ask the officer, "Officer, am I free to go?" All right. If they're not going to arrest you, then you're free to go, all right? And you don't say yes to them asking unless they have probable cause to pull, reasonable suspicion is what it takes for searching in a car, which is not hard to meet, but just you say no politely and you should be on your way. So, but those are generally considered the things that you need in order to use deadly force and in evaluating a situation, and that's why it's easy to second guess these things from an armchair. But the person who was shot, even though he was not armed, all right, he very well could have been making actions that were suggestive of him reaching for a firearm, him acting as if he did have a firearm, right? Just because there's no smoking gun doesn't mean that the person who pulled and shot didn't have a reasonable belief to suspect his life was in danger. Doesn't mean he was justified either, right? That's why these situations are very bad. And to the other point about being in a neighborhood watch situation, And I actually agree with the operator to not continue to pursue, because you could be considered the aggressor.
Yeah, and that was the other question that because somebody was talking about it online, and I talk online, whatever. But somebody was sort of defending the guy, saying, "Oh, I want to see all the facts in the case," and we were armchairing it, obviously.
Sure.
But I said, "Well, I mean, in my state, I know that you're not allowed to pursue. You're not, and as far as I know, you're not. You can't be the
Aggressor.
Aggressor, or somebody that the person that initiates the
Sure.
confrontation."
Yeah, and that gets a little bit into the citizen's arrest stuff. And so in the state of Utah, you're allowed to effectuate a citizen's arrest. And basically, for citizen's arrest, the felony has to be in its commission. If the felony is over, you may no longer continue to follow the person. Okay,
Right.
And that's where law enforcement and citizens have a different
Or
ability.
if it's a preemptive felony, we don't know that a felony is happening, but it's somebody that I don't know in my neighborhood. He's just walking down the street, because he wasn't getting in somebody's house. He wasn't even in
Exactly.
somebody's yard. He was walking down the street on his way back from the grocery store.
Exactly.
And so you going up to jam him up, I mean, that does not bode well.
Sure. And that's where neighborhood watch situations, and without training and without understanding of the laws and use of force and escalation of force, right? The homeowner, the captain on the neighborhood watch situation there could be the person to be called the aggressor, right? And causing that to happen. All right. And so they've got to be very careful. They have a very valid reason to be on a neighborhood watch and protecting their homes and their neighborhood, and I get that. But at the same time, they need to take extra precautions to not put themselves into a situation where they might be considered the aggressor.
Well, and that's what I always say about firearm owners, is that the consequences of everything you do become so severe that it should, hopefully, inspire people to be extra careful people.
Exactly.
And so hopefully.
Yeah, to be more in tune with the laws and know the statutes as far as self-defense, but also, like you said, get training and be and be prepared in those be prepared in the situation.
Yeah, and one of the things that you'll oftentimes hear people say in the gun community is, it's better to be judged by 12 than carried by 6. That's a very common saying, and I agree with that mostly. But the thing that I don't agree with that is exactly where this situation comes into play here. It suggests shoot first, ask questions later, and that's why this situation is very, very concerning, right? Because unless you have a reasonable belief that person is going to take your life or is going to do something that is likely to cause you death or serious bodily injury, you've got to take extra precaution in how you handle yourself. And so it just also reemphasizes the need for training and for people to understand the use of force and understand how to get out of situations. And I have found in my training, in my experience, the best martial artists, the people who are really good with firearms and who understand this stuff, they're also very good about getting out of situations as well.
Yeah, I mean, not only knowing the law and knowing knowing really well how to pull or how to recognize a firearm, but also not to be a dick. Knowing,
Exactly.
Just it should naturally just soften your voice a little.
Exactly.
I'm going to be a passive guy until it comes down to it.
Yep.
But I know how not to. Because even if somebody is a felon, if they are potentially an aggressor, there's really no reason for me to jump into that situation and make him an aggressor.
Exactly.
Just to be a super passive guy that everybody likes.
Yeah.
Unless something really happens that it's necessary.
Yeah, and it seems like that's a lot of the anti-gun culture seems to make the assumption that leap, and I can see where their thoughts want to go, but I don't agree with it. Is that the very desire to have weapons and to carry them around makes you an aggressor just
Sure.
by that fact. I get that argument. I don't agree with it,
Yeah.
but it's exactly right. We would argue that it should soften you up a little bit. It should make you more vigilant to the situations at hand and to know better. It's the line from Spider-Man. It's great power that requires great responsibility. Yeah. It's not great power that lets you just use it willy-nilly.
Yep.
And
An
it
armed
doesn't make us
society.
David Bronson either.
What's that?
It doesn't make us Bronson either.
That's Charlie Bronson.
Charles Bronson or David Bronson either.
I know him. He's a good guy.
Yeah. Well, an armed society is a polite society, and that's That's the thing, is that in my perspective as a Second Amendment attorney is that everybody should have their firearms, and I try to help people who have had felony convictions or whatever be able to get their firearms back, because it's not more than a Second Amendment right in a country right. It's a God-given right for us to be able to protect ourselves, and the firearm is just the most effective way for your average everyday person to be able to have that.
Absolutely, and that's what you're here to do, Mike Steck, My Utah CCW. What other websites do you want to plug?
Yeah, I've got a bunch here going.
Go for it.
My big one right now for the firearm self-defense stuff is gunblog.com, and blog is BLAWG, so it's a play on gun, blog, and the law. So check it out, gunblog.com. I'll have all 50 states self-defense and concealed carry laws up there for free, plus reviews of firearms and things just like this, self-defense and Second Amendment law issues that are forthcoming, talking about NF8 gun trusts for the Class 3 items, all of the cool stuff that goes along with owning a firearm.
Awesome. And JoeFirearms.com?
Yep, Joe Firearms is where we have AK-47s and AR-15s. We're trying to make the best firearms, the best gear for everyday Joe, and just take all the crap out of there and just give people the best stuff that they need.
Absolutely. Thanks, Mike. We appreciate you stepping by.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.